Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I am going to be filming another compost related video. I'm out next to my compost bin and I filmed a video a while ago that I'll put up here. It was all about simple composting and how to start a compost bin. And I had a few people want to know about the end of the compost cycle and what to do when your compost bin is full, how to remove the compost, and actually how to then use it in your garden. So that is the video that I'm going to be filming and creating for you today, all about how to harvest and use your compost in your garden. If you haven't already figured out, I really love composting. I think it is such a wonderful thing to do in the garden. I think every gardener and everyone who has the ability to do so should be having some kind of compost system in their garden or balcony or apartment, or utilizing like compost hubs if you cannot have a compost bin or a worm farm. There's so many different options to be recycling our waste and our food scraps to create gold for the garden. Here on our property we have multiple compost systems. I love these compost tumblers here. I use them quite a lot in the garden and I've done quite a few videos on how to use these, but we also do have quite a few worm farms as well, where we use worms to create worm castings and use that as a compost as well. Into these bins and the worm farms we put a lot of our food scraps. We also compost all of our pet waste, so we have 2 little cats and everything that comes out of their kitty litter, if you know what I mean, goes into some of the worm farms where we don't use that worm castings on like the garden behind me or anything that is edible. We use those worm castings on fruit trees and other native plants, but we do like to recycle pretty much all of the organic waste that comes out of the household. But today isn't about worm farms, it's about how to remove compost and what to do with it from a bin such as this. This video also applies to tumblers that don't actually touch the ground. This one here is a 150 litre compost tumbler from Tumbleweed. I really love their products, they last a long time and I've just always used them, so this is definitely my go-to if you're starting out of composting. Currently we have 2 of these. I would like to get a third so that I can have a third system working, but this has been sitting for a few months now and is definitely ready to be used. It's definitely not the most well done compost. I prefer to just use what I have. There are going to be some lumps and some chunks of things in here, but for the way that I use compost, I don't really mind. I definitely lean towards the more lazy gardener. So yeah, I don't like to fuss. I don't think compost should be too fussy. I think it should just be really simple and easy, which is how we compost here on our property. Alright, so I'm going to do a little bit of a voiceover to kind of talk you through what I'm doing to remove the compost from this bin and share how to actually use it in the garden. So I really hope you enjoy. If you do, make sure to like this video and subscribe for lots more gardening and flower farming content. We create a lot of different types of videos here, and compost videos are definitely ones that I really love to make because I love to share knowledge about compost and you all seem to really enjoy them as well. So I would really appreciate your support. It's completely free to like and subscribe and really helps me out. So as I mentioned before, this is the compost bin that I have. It's the 150 litre Tumbleweed compost bin. I'm pretty sure you can get larger ones than this, but I find this is a really great size for us. It's only a 2-person household and we put all of our food scraps in here. So this was completely full when I finished this compost off, and it has broken down quite a lot. This is one thing that always shocks me with compost bins, is how much it actually breaks down. Like the whole bin is filled and then you leave it for a few months and that really reduces. You can kind of see here, this is what the compost is looking like. This is a fairly rough compost. Like I don't really mind that it's not fully broken down. This had a lot of wood chips, mulch in it, lots of different things, and I'm going to be using it in lots of different ways. So yeah, I don't personally mind that it's not broken down. If you do like a finer compost, you can leave it a bit longer or turn your compost more often. I tend to not turn it as much as I should, but yeah, it's completely up to you. To remove the compost, firstly I'm just taking out all of the pegs that I have that I use to hold the bin down, basically, so that it's easier to turn the compost, and then just really gently lifting it up. It's as simple as that to harvest your compost from these systems, and then you get the amazing surprise of all of the different creepy crawlies that are living in your compost bin, breaking it down into absolute gold for your garden. You can see all of these gorgeous worms are creating worm castings that is just going to be amazing for fertilizing and feeding your plants. Seeing life and different bugs and different activity in your compost is a good thing, so definitely don't be put off by that. It's really interesting to see and really amazing how much diversity is in these systems. You can see here that some of the grass from around this bin was trying to creep up and actually grow. Didn't really manage to do that, and that's fine. I can just take that out. Just keep in mind, if you do have grass around, that if it's invasive like this one, it may creep in. You can also see all of the different layers of the compost here. So obviously the layers at the very top are going to be the least broken down because they're not being covered and the worms aren't moving around in those layers as much as they are in the very bottom layers. So what I like to do when I'm harvesting it is I take off the first kind of really rough layer of compost and I set that aside into a different tray, and I'll show you how I use that throughout this video. But you can see here I'm just lightly scraping off that top layer of the really more rough compost, and I'm just putting this into a plant tray, but you can use whatever you have that has smaller holes in it to kind of sieve this mixture. What I'm doing here, just really lightly to get any of that finer compost out, and then a lot of these larger chunks we are going to be using in the garden. But yeah, this is the first step on how I like to harvest my compost from these systems. You can also just put the larger materials back into a compost bin or a worm farm to kind of finish off and break down even further. It's completely up to you. Again, I really don't mind that the compost is rough, but there are a few things in there that I don't really, think are going to break down too much further. There's things like avocado peels and avocado pits. They take a long time to break down, so I do tend to remove those. But this is what the middle of the compost looks like. Really, really beautiful, nicely broken down. Eggshells again are another thing that take a while to break down, but yeah, it's amazing to see what this kind of came from, which was just food scraps and weeds and materials around the garden, to now this beautiful mixture that we can use to feed our plants. So once I remove the top layer, I am just going to be taking the compost out and putting it into this little garden cart that I have, and I'm just going to be piling this up to use in all of the different jobs and ways I like to use compost in the garden. As I go, I am taking out some of the larger bits just to further compost or to add into that larger mulch pile that I have, just to remove some of the really large sticks from this compost bin. And also finding all of the interesting creepy crawlies, adding that back in because that can work its magic and feed some plants somewhere. But yeah, I always find it really interesting to see what's in my compost bin. Can you tell? I find this very interesting. So once the pile dwindles, I move on to the first way that I usually use compost from a system like this, which I do a lot of in situ composting, and that is to just leave it be. I don't actually remove it. I don't use it. I turn wherever I have a compost bin into a garden bed. I've done this in a few other videos that I'll link below about just the importance and the benefits of in situ composting, which basically means that you're putting a compost bin or a compost system over an area that you're either going to one day turn into a garden or just grow something productive in, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm leaving a lot of the worms that I'm finding, and a lot of this compost I'm just spreading out as like a mulch layer. You can think of it as like a no-dig garden bed, I suppose. So I'm just spreading it out after I remove some of the weeds in this area, and this is going to be fantastic to grow some greens or vegetables in. I'm sure the plants are going to love this mixture to grow in. Whenever I do put fresh compost on, I always like to cover it with mulch. That just ensures to keep in all of that moisture so that a lot of the worms and bacteria and microbes can just keep on working and breaking that down even further. It always pays to mulch your soil wherever you can. Moving on to the next way I like to use compost, and that is just to add some life into soil. So you can see here I have this container that hasn't had plants in it or anything growing in it for quite a while. Pretty sure it was just native soil with a little bit of fertilizer in it, and it was completely dead. There's no life, there's no worms, there's no microbes. Well, there's probably a few microbes, but there's probably not a lot. So I am using the compost as well as some other potting mix that I had on hand to create a little bit more organic material in this pot. Adding compost is just going to add that life back into soil that's just been sitting there for ages, and this is something that I regularly do if I have pots lying around that are very dry or old and need a little bit of some love. I just add a bit of compost. And then to this container I was just planting a few more jonquils. I might plant it up with a few other violas or pansies. We'll see how I go, but I'm really excited to see how this goes, and I will keep you updated on the videos. But yeah, I think these bulbs are definitely going to like this compost as a feed, and I'm always making sure to mulch the top of this once I'm done kind of layering up those compost and soil layers. The next way I like to use compost is by making a fertilizer. This is a really simple one. All you need to do is just add a few handfuls to a bucket, stir it up. I like to let it sit for a day or two, and then I can dilute it and use it as a liquid fertilizer for my plants. So this was sitting here for about a day. I'm just straining it and adding it to another bucket. This mixture, the compost fertilizer, isn't very strong, so I'm using probably maybe like a fifth of this watering can of this compost fertilizer, and then I'm filling the rest up and diluting it with water. And then just giving my plants a drink. Again, this is adding all of that life and bacteria and microbes from that compost bin into the soil around the roots of the plants that you're growing. That is directly going to feed them and give them all that beautiful benefits from compost. Now we're back to using all of that rough compost, that top layer of the materials that really weren't broken down, and I'm actually just going to use these as a mulch layer around some of the trees that I have planted down the back of the property. So I'm just mulching this little tree here that I planted a while ago. It's because it's planted in grass, it really does need some mulch, or else the grass is just going to take over. So I'm just using this as a mulch layer, putting it straight on top of the grass. And then because I want to retain, all of that moisture and goodness, I'm then adding some sugarcane mulch on top, and it's going to create a really nice mulch ring, not only to keep in all of that moisture for the plant to grow, but also just to give it that food that it needs. And I'm sure this tree is going to love its life in this area with all of that gorgeous compost. If you don't have trees planted in the ground, you can always do this step the same for pots. So I regularly go around and top up the pots that I have and containers with plants in them. I'll top them up with some compost, add a bit of sugarcane mulch, and it does both the two. It tops up the container and also provides fertilizer for the plants. Alright, then we move on to the last way I like to use compost in the garden. There's probably a few others, but we're just keeping it simple for this video. And that is to use the compost when I am planting plants in the ground. So I had this fence here. It used to have a row of oleanders planted in there. I really don't like oleanders, so we took them out and we're going to be replacing them with native plants and other kind of cottage style garden plants along this fence line. The first of those are going to be some gorgeous little nugget acacias. They're really cool. They have amazing spiky leaves. And I'm just placing the compost at the base of the holes that I'm digging, then planting the plants in and then backfilling, again with also mixing a little bit of compost in around the plant. And I like to add some kind of fertilizer whenever I'm planting plants, whether it's something like blood and bone, some worm castings, or some fresh compost into the base of the hole wherever I'm planting the plant. And that just allows those roots to get that nutrient straight away, encourages them to grow, has a really great growth medium for them to reach out and be able to put their roots out rather into the hard ground. And I think these plants are really going to love it and look really amazing in this area. I'm very happy to be rid of the oleanders and happy to see these acacias thrive. I really hope you enjoyed today's video and that you found it helpful. I would love to know, how do you use compost in your garden? What does your system look like, and what are the benefits that compost has provided for your garden? I honestly think that nothing compares to homemade compost. There are so many different beneficial microbes and bacteria and worms that are local to your own environment and your own local systems that provide just the best nutrients for your plants. So I've definitely seen my garden respond really well to using this homemade compost, and I can't see myself ever not making compost somehow in my backyard. If you do have any questions for me on composting, or you would like any future videos, please do leave them in the comment section down below, and I will happily create much more compost content because it's definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about. I could talk about it for so long, and actually have spoken about it for quite a long time in one of our podcast episodes. So myself and Diane from Diane and Samson run the Earthly Roots podcast, where we chat all things about gardening and nature and homesteading, and we did do an episode all about composting, so I'll definitely leave that in the link in the description box, but make sure to check out the podcast because we do talk about compost quite a lot over there. Alright, thank you so much for watching again. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to give it a like and subscribe for lots more videos. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are in the world, and until my next video, happy gardening everyone. Bye!